Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, November 30th. First up, we take a look at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. There is low pressure off of Central California, producing a small area of seas, but not particularly inspiring. Certainly nothing of any size that will produce swell relative to California. If anything, probably more fetches aimed at Hawaii, but again, seas aren't even at the 18-foot mark, so not a whole lot is expected to result from that. But a broader low-pressure system over the northern dateline region is producing 26-foot seas, targeting Hawaii well. Swell is in the water already from previous incarnations this low and moving towards Hawaii. And yet one more small area of low pressure producing 20-foot seas aimed back at Japan, but nothing for our forecast area. Let's go dive into the details. We'll take a look at jet stream level winds. These winds, up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of storms and then also direct their track when they do form. Right now, we have a very incoherent jet stream flow. It's all over the place. Pushing up into the Bering Sea, running flat across. It's split multiple times. The only area of really any interest is this trough here in the Gulf of Alaska. What is that? About 120 knot winds, supporting a little bit of low pressure here, and we see that manifest down at the ocean surface where we saw 17-foot seas right in this area. Also, if Hawaii's right there, the winds in the upper level atmosphere seem to be a good indication of what's going on at lower levels of the atmosphere. But of interest here, notice the jet does somewhat pull together, push into California and Baja, Mexico. This is where all the moisture is right now, and the thought is that this area will be the focus of more moisture in the days ahead, which is a good thing for California's water supply. Let's put this into motion, see what happens. The low here sort of gets cut off into Monday, but is still hanging on, basically not doing a whole lot. There's not a lot of wind energy in there supporting it, and starts moving inland by Tuesday night into Wednesday. But of most interest, notice this. 170, almost 170 knot winds here, starting to develop off Japan. The interesting part about this is it's about right in sync with the building active phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation. Typically, when the MJO turns active, more energy is imparted into the jet stream, and the expectation is as the MJO develops over the coming 2 weeks, the jet stream will become more coherent. You'll get more pockets of energy, more defined troughs, and that should help improve storm development over the long haul. We got to get to that point, though, first. So here we are, Tuesday night. Roll this out. Notice the jet stream, as this energy starts moving across the Pacific, the jet stream starts pulling together, looking much better, looking more normal for the time of year by Thursday, and now we're into Friday. These winds continue building, reaching over the dateline almost to a point north of Hawaii. No real trough showing, but look at this. Now we're into Saturday. We've got 200 knot winds in the jet stream, running pretty much flat west to east on the 40 north latitude line here. But that's an impressive amount of energy. We just need a trough to start forming out of it. And sure enough, by Monday, a week out, we notice a trough starting to develop here in the Gulf of Alaska. Look at this, flat energy going the whole way almost to California. So this bodes quite well for the future, especially if we could get some sort of a trough developing either in the Gulf or over the dateline. With this much wind energy, that should definitely help in part or support storm development, or at least gale development in lower levels of the atmosphere. Let's go take a look down there and see what's projected. And here we go, surface level pressure and winds. First off, the low pressure system we spoke of earlier, off California. Notice all the fetch here, there is up to 40 knot winds, but they're all aimed to more off to the, what would that be, the southwest. No fetch in the south quadrant of the system aimed to California. No swell of any significance is expected. But relative to Hawaii, these winds should produce seas pushing towards the Hawaiian Islands. We'll get into that in a minute. Also notice low pressure here. This low previously was down off here and has worked its way northeast. Still 35, almost 40 knot winds, aimed somewhat Hawaii and also at the U.S. West Coast, but a good bit away from the U.S. West Coast, with the core of the low now moving up into the Bering Sea. And again, one last little low off Japan, but it suffers the same situation as this low in that all the fetch is aimed back to the west towards Japan. Let's put this into motion, see what happens. We're into Monday. Continued fetch in this low, again aimed at Hawaii. Maybe, what is that, 30-knot winds, maybe in pockets, aims to the U.S. West Coast. That's good for southwest wind swell, but not a whole lot more. Nothing even in the 13-second range. Continued fetch here over the Aleutians, but it's only that fetch south of the Aleutians that counts for producing swell relative to California. And then another broad low-pressure system starting to build over the southern Kuril Islands, but not making a whole lot of headway. So here we go. We're into Tuesday now. Low pressure continues lingering off of California, mainly producing weather and precipitation. Good news. Also, a tropical system is modeled. This has been on the charts for a while here off the Philippines. Not sure whether that will really happen or not, but if it does, that would be good news, especially if it were to recurve to the northeast. With the building active phase of the MJO, it would not be surprising, even given this late in the season, for something to form. Anyway, put this into motion. Low pressure continues in the Gulf of Alaska. Nothing really impressive. 30-knot winds, that's it, falling sort of southeast. And then we get into Friday, a better fetch of 35-knot winds developing in the Gulf, pushing towards the east. This could build swell for Hawaii and California and U.S. West Coast. But again, nothing particularly impressive. That fades out into the weekend. Another secondary fetch develops here. Notice the tropical system continues just sort of lingering in this area off the Philippines, not really doing a whole lot, but looking to cover a pretty good area. And then here, this is the 18Z run of the model. This is a new development as of Sunday, a week out. A small area of 45 to 50 knot winds is projected north of Hawaii. Not really believable. And then going to 55 knots into Sunday evening, that looks pretty impressive. If the jet stream were doing what it was forecast, it would not be surprising if this did materialize. And yet another system, 45 knot winds projected, pushing towards the dateline. This is a nice little setup here with 3 systems and a strong jet. It looks promising per the models, but never believe the models more than a couple days out. But it's a step in the right direction. At least the models are hinting that something favorable is to develop. Let's go take a look at the wave model charts and see what effect these winds would have on the ocean surface. So significant wave heights here. We're going to actually go back in time a little bit. We're on Friday of the 28th of November. Notice low pressure here off Japan, 30-foot seas, but not really aimed at Hawaii. Here's the Great Circle pass to Hawaii. Notice all this fetch and the swell vector or wave vector here is all pushing basically perpendicular to these lines down towards the Marshall Islands, not towards Hawaii initially. But as we put this into motion, notice here we're into Saturday roughly. Then we have 33-foot seas aimed down about the 298-degree path to Hawaii, and then that system starts to fade a little bit into Saturday 18Z 28-foot seas, but again aimed about the 306-degree path into Hawaii, and then it starts lifting north, and then we're actually right there is where we are currently. So now let's take, and notice energy also still aimed at Hawaii, down about the 319 path to that area there, and about 312, so in that range. So what it appears is swell initially coming from the west, and then moving more to the northwest for the Hawaiian Islands. That swell is already in the water. It has been generated, and more is likely expected. Nothing huge in size, just fun size Hawaiian, in the double overhead range or so. Anyway, let's roll this out now. We're into Sunday night. Again, still 25-foot seas roughly down the 328-degree path or so to Hawaii. Also notice over here, we'll put this back a little bit, the cutoff low off California starts finally getting some traction. We get about 26-foot seas aimed also towards Hawaii. This would be northeast swell. Know that we don't have the Great Circle pass here. This is about the 40 to 45-degree path coming into the Hawaiian Islands. And that continues into about Monday morning, and then it too. So the Great Circle path would be something like that. So still here, this portion would be pushing towards Hawaii, again at 40 degrees. But then by Monday night, actually another little tiny secondary pulse swells. So that probably will not be anywhere near as impressive as this is a swell coming from the northwest, but still, swell from 2 angles could be interesting. Anyway, rolled out. We're into Tuesday now. Continued unsettled weather south of the Aleutians, 24, 25-foot seas. Good for background swell, but nothing particularly impressive. And then things kind of settled down a bit, and we're now into Thursday night. And then we see a little tiny secondary fetch, and we're kind of reaching here. This is 20-foot seas. That's not going to do a whole lot probably more for Hawaii, down about the 347-degree path, but not a whole lot for California yet. Unless it actually starts getting better traction, we're just not seeing that. Now, the interesting point here is this is the 12Z run of the model. The atmospheric models we were looking at were the 18Z run. They've actually made a significant step upward. The sea height models are running now. They should post at some point, and we expect to see a step up in the about 7-day out of this model and of these systems in this area. So something to watch for. But again, 7 days out, probably a little too early to get too interested or to believe any of it, but we'll see what happens. At least, again, the models are trending in the right direction. All right, next we go to long-term projections. What's happening? We've talked about the MJO some, and you can actually see it manifest in the daily Southern Oscillation Index numbers. Difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Current values, -11. You see we've kind of gone on a little spurt here the past couple of days in the minus teens. It kind of backed off for a while, but the reality is these numbers have been running mostly negative for quite a while now. The 30-day running average is it's back down to -8, and the 90-day average is -7.63. So again, this is looking like a long-running active phase of the MJO or a weak El Nino, and they're both basically one and the same thing. This is good. These numbers suggest that the atmosphere is biased towards storm development, which is exactly what we want to see. Next, we take a look at surface level wind anomalies. These are differences from normal for this time of year, and specifically we're interested here in this region. We call it the Kelvin wave generation area, a couple degrees either side of the equator, running from about 135 east to about 70 west. Currently, it looks like there's some weak westerly anomalies trying to get going right in this region, but there's still some easterly anomalies here towards the date line, but for the most part, pretty neutral. This is actually a good news because we have had a stretch, about a week and a half, of easterly anomalies here, the first run of easterly anomalies the entire year. So it's good to see those cleared out. The suspicion, notice there's westerly anomalies starting to build back here too, is that with the active phase of the MJO moving from the Indian Ocean over towards the West Pacific, that we'll start to see more westerly anomalies here. That could help support yet more warm water transport from the West Pacific to the East Pacific in the form of a Kelvin wave, or at a minimum help support storm development by pushing tropical warm air up to the north and then having the jet stream catch it and sort of fuel storm development in the northern latitudes of the North Pacific. Also off to the further off to the east, we see pretty much just a little bit of east anomalies here. That would be typical of the inactive phase of the MJO working its way across the Pacific and getting ready to exit through Central America, and again off to the west, the active phase moving in. A week from now, we see some westerly anomalies continuing here. Notice this circulation associated with the forecast tropical system off the Philippines. Again, a little bit of lingering easterly anomalies towards the dateline area, but nothing particularly strong. Notice this also westerly anomalies starting to build just north of the equator. And then continuing on to the east, again a weak westerly flow just about 4 degrees north. But for the most part, pretty much a little bit of west even down at the equator, but for the most part, pretty much a neutral flow. We've seen this chart before. The oranges and yellows are westerly anomalies, the blues are easterly anomalies, and then the Pacific Ocean would be roughly from about here, even over here, 120 east to, let's say, about 90 or so west. So that's the area we're looking at, and here is the easterly anomalies we were talking about that started roughly about the 11th of November, and are fading out through about the 25th or even the 26th of November. And notice these are westerly anomalies, exactly what we want to see on the very far western edge of the Kelvin wave generation area. Again, this is actuals, and then this is the forecast here. So you notice the easterly anomalies disappear, westerly anomalies start taking charge, assuming these models are correct, but that again is an indication of the emergence of the active phase of the MJO. Here's another depiction of that. The blues are the active phase of the MJO, yellows and reds the inactive phase. This is outgoing long wave radiation. That is a satellite depicting sun reflectivity off the ocean's surface. Okay, so this would suggest high pressure, the inactive phase of the MJO, and easterly anomalies is current initialization, and the active phase of the MJO, more precipitation, westerly anomalies currently set up in the eastern Indian Ocean, starting to make headway into the West Pacific. This statistic model suggests that the active phase of the MJO over the next 15 days is to hold solid and push to the west, while the inactive phase continues working its way to the east and basically disintegrating. The dynamic model is not nearly as aggressive or as positive looking as the statistic model, but it still shows that the active phase is to work its way to the date line about 15 days out, so about the middle of December, with the inactive phase fading out. Notice both models, here we go, here show the inactive phase building in the Indian Ocean and then also following behind. The interesting part about this is there has been virtually no MJO activity actually happening this entire year, and now all of a sudden the MJO is starting to emerge. This would suggest that El Nino, or whatever flavor of a Modoki El Nino that we're in, is actually starting to fade. Typically, when you have El Nino in play, the MJO disappears. It sort of takes on a characteristic of a persistent active phase of the MJO, but it really isn't coherent and there is no real cycles in it. It's just sort of a steady state. Now we're starting to see the emergence of regular active, inactive phase with running about three to 4 weeks each. This is what the models say. It'll be interesting to see what actually materializes, but so far, based on what very early data that we're seeing, this appears to be a legitimate inactive phase, and it was manifest but with east winds at the ocean surface, the first east winds of the entire year. And now we see the active phase coming in behind, so we would expect to see westerly anomalies develop, and then the commensurate symptoms of those westerly anomalies, which would be an increased storm track. Notice the storm track basically has fallen apart for the past 3 weeks. It would be if it comes back and all of a sudden we get this good burst of storms, then it would suggest that we're in more of a normal pattern and that whatever El Nino we had is likely to start falling apart. Here's the upper level model. Very strong, robust, active phase of the MJO is depicted here. This is really, the greens are the active phase of the MJO. They're depicting areas that support precipitation. The oranges and the yellows are areas that do not support precipitation. So one could say this is the active phase, this is the inactive phase, and you can see the active phase is forecast to work its way across the Pacific on the equator through roughly about Christmas time, December 25th, with the inactive phase starting to develop in the far west Pacific about mid-December to the 20th, and then working its way across into about the 9th of January, with yet another active phase behind that. So about 3 weeks for each cycle. This is pretty much a normal cycle. When the active phase is doing its thing, storm development is enhanced in the North Pacific, specifically in the Gulf of Alaska and the Dateline region. When the inactive phase is running its way across the Pacific, storm development is dampened. That doesn't mean storms don't happen. It's just the likelihood for them happening is less. and that they are not as strong or as long lasting when they do form. So these are the sweet spots we're looking for storm development. So as of right now, based on this model, looks like we're good through about Christmas, but then sometime after that, the pattern's going to back off into probably about the 15th of January, and then things will wake up again. But it's a model that's going 40 days out. Take it with a grain of salt, but it is sort of an interesting thing to follow and monitor, and it also gives us some indications about what's going on with our El Nino setup. Next up, sea surface temperature anomalies, deviations from normal for this time of year. Last time we had a bit of a discussion about all the water temperatures in the Pacific, and for that matter, all the oceans being warmer than normal. We discussed some about climatology, etc., etc. We're not going to get into that this evening, but given the climatology that is currently being used as of November 27th, we see warm anomalies across the entire equatorial Pacific. The Nino 3.4 region, the area that's really used to monitor the formation of El Nino, goes from about here, you draw a box around to about here, and you see definitely warmer than normal water here. This is probably the best we've seen all year. It's not extraordinary, but it's definite warming. This helps support pouring energy into the jet stream and the atmosphere. It's certainly a lot better than colder than normal water in this region, and this would be, if this were occurring in July or August, we'd go, hey, it looks like the start of El Nino. But seeing how we're effectively in December now, and it's just barely at the threshold, again, it's kind of a Madoki El Nino situation. That is sort of El Nino, but not really, just, you know, kind of teetering on the threshold. NOAA's official declaration is you got to have 5 months of a 3-month running mean of averages, you know, above a half a degree, and it just seems like that's probably not going to happen this year. Still, this is a much better setup than what we've had for the past couple of years, and helps to support pouring energy into the jet stream as we talked before. Warm water also continues off the U.S. West Coast, and cold water that was off of Chile here has definitely been beat way back now. So in the short of it is, we got a pretty good ocean surface temperature pattern going on right now. And again, here's another way to look at it. So this is the equatorial Pacific, Galapagos Islands roughly here, far west Pacific over here, actual winds and surface temperatures, but it's the anomalies, deviations from normal, that we're really looking at. Notice 1 degree anomalies covering the entire equatorial Pacific, pushing near, what is that, 1.5 degrees, near just south of Hawaii. Winds, looking at this, it's pretty much neutral, which is what we saw on the other models. No clear signs of westerly anomalies yet, but this runs about a day behind some of the other charts, so we would expect to maybe see some of the arrows starting to work their way out of the west here in the next day, and certainly in the coming days. So this is indicates, again, roughly a Madoki El Nino situation. All this warm water is the result of multiple Kelvin waves that have erupted off of the Galapagos and then been picked up by the trades in the warm water working its way back to the west. Let's, in fact, take a look and see what's going on down at subsurface level in the ocean. Here we go. Profile. We're looking down at depth. This is the West Pacific. This is the East Pacific. Here's absolute temperatures, but it is the deviation from normal that we're most interested in. Last week we had talked about, and several weeks before that, we've talked about 1 Kelvin wave, pocket of warmer than normal water that had worked its way across the West Pacific. Here's the second of that pair of Kelvin waves, now centered roughly about 120, 125 west. So it's about 3 or 4 weeks from actually erupting off the Galapagos and then starting to work its way, getting caught by the trades and working its way back to the west. When this Kelvin wave erupts, we expect it will add yet more warm water across the equatorial Pacific, and those 1 and 1.5 degree anomalies that we saw should get reinforced, if not build a little more. The question is, Normally, El Niños peak out in about the late December, early January time frame. This Kelvin wave looks like it'll be on track for that, let's say late December, and work its way into January. So that would be the peak of this. The interesting part is that we've had easterly anomalies here, and it is westerly anomalies. You need winds blowing from west to east to push warm water down at depth. The question is, are we going to get another Kelvin wave, or is the Kelvin wave machine going to shut off? Is the development of the MJO, the more cyclical version of the MJO, going to put a damper on Kelvin wave development? Will there be no more Kelvin waves, or will there just be little weaker ones? It's anyone's guess at this point in time what's going to happen. The issue is not so much for this winter, because there's already plenty of warm water here down at depth and at the surface, and the jet stream has already been influenced. And it's not like if the warm water, if this last Kelvin waves erupts in January, it's not like boom, all of a sudden the jet stream is going to get shut off. No, we've got plenty of momentum going to get us probably through March or April at a minimum. The question is, what's going to happen after that? Unknown. Typically, if you're going to have a strong El Nino, you'll see westerly wind bursts develop in the January-February time frame. You get massive Kelvin waves, starting to work its way across, which is exactly what happened the early part of this year. The thought is, or the hope is, if there is going to be like a major El Nino, all that would happen in the January-February time frame. But no one has any belief that that will happen. It's just something to look for. Right now, we seem good for the short term. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen long term. Here's yet another view of the existing Kelvin wave as of November 24th, working its towards the Galapagos. Not a whole lot different from the version we saw earlier. And upper ocean heat anomalies. Again, remember we talked about January, February, March getting massive westerly wind bursts. Well, that's what happened this year, January 24th. And here's a huge Kelvin wave that worked its way across the Pacific Ocean. Then we had the upwelling phase in the June-ish, July time frame, followed by first 1 week Kelvin wave that made its way across the Pacific through mainly in August into September. And now here's the next one, stronger, and just about ready to reach the Galapagos. And it started in about the September time frame, and will probably do its thing by late December into early January. So again, what's next? We don't know. We're keeping our fingers crossed, but we're hoping that we don't run into some sort of La Nina situation, but that some sort of this, because it's a weak El Nino, the Modoki El Ninas, they tend to linger kind of on and off for a year or two or three, and we're kind of hoping that that is more the situation. And finally, the forecast from the CFS version 2 model for the Nino 3.4 region, again, between about 170 west to 120 west. Here we are, 1 degree anomalies per all data, and the model is showing this as of December-ish, late November. And temperatures basically to hold there, maybe back off. We'll get back down to about 0.8 degrees or so, but that is per this model is to hold into April. And then in April, the model suggests things really taking off, moving towards almost 2 degrees by the August time frame of 2015. If that were to happen, we'd be pushing towards a super El Nino kind of setup. We don't believe this, of course, but the whole point is what's going to happen here in the spring time frame, the unpredictability barrier from about March into June or so. The models have a really hard time. The atmosphere needs to make up its mind. We'll be looking in the January, February, March time frame for some early signs, specifically around Kelvin wave development and westerly wind bursts. But for now, we'll just see what happens. It's an interesting guide. It's a nice tease, but we don't believe any of this. So to wrap things up right now, swell is in the water, pushing towards Hawaii. Some small portions of that will reach the U.S. West Coast. In the meantime, the California area is going to get hopefully a good bit of rain and snow in upper elevations. There's already maybe 4 or 5 inches in the Tahoe region, and there has been residual light snow on the ground for several weeks now, so the ground's pretty well frozen. We just need the precipitation machine to kick in and just get a series of snow making weather systems to continue to work their way towards the coast. Anyway, the models are more favorable. The 18Z run suggesting that more storm development is on the way for the Gulf of Alaska and the Dateline region later this week. That is likely attributable to the building active phase of the MJO. And then, of course, our El Nino setup, which is basically warm water in place, supporting the jet stream. We expect a pretty decent winter. Nothing exceptional, but average, if not a little bit better. And then long term, the million-dollar question, will we have westerly wind bursts? Will we get more Kelvin wave development in the January, February, March timeframe? We don't know, but we'll keep our eyes on it. But for now, there is little surf in the water. Get it when you can. Have a good time. In the meantime, we're going to continue to do the forecast Sunday as always. See you next time. Same place, same channel. Thanks again.